CNU Talks, Beyond the Great Lawn. CNU Talks is a virtual learning program created by and for the CNU community. Many of your beloved faculty and fellow captains will share topics which elicit thought and compassion, stimulate intellect, and connect us in profound ways. Today, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Kip Redick, Professor and Chair of Christopher Newport's Department of Philosophy and Religion. Dr. Redick is also the Director of CNU's Pre-Seminary Studies Program, a Marine Corps veteran, and an alumnus of Christopher Newport. He has taught courses at CNU for nearly 30 years in sacred communication, great philosophers, primal religions, and many more intriguing topics. In 2002, Dr. Redick broadened his classroom teaching to courses leading students on wilderness studies through the Appalachian Trail. Over the years, student interest in these immersive experiences has grown so immensely, Dr. Redick has now led students through 100 miles of Appalachian wilderness in Maine, a circumnavigation of Mount Rainier, and on 500-mile treks across the entire length of the Camino de Santiago, from France, across Spain, and to the Atlantic Ocean. He has taught an Oxford Honours Trek in Scotland, a cultural exchange to Morocco, semester-long adventures in Prague and Iceland, as well as trips to Germany, Italy, Greece, and Israel. We hope today that you'll enjoy, as much as we do, CNU Talks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kip Redick, Professor of Philosophy and Religion and Chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Christopher Newport University. Welcome to my classroom. In this talk, I invite you to a brief scratching of the surface of my research and teaching. And then in closing, I'll show how it might interpret the current coronavirus pandemic. My research and scholarship have focused on interpreting long-distance hiking as pilgrimage, with special attention to the relation of environment, space, and place in the manifestation of sacred journeys. I have included my undergraduate students in this research, both in the traditional classroom as well as in the field. Starting in 2002, students accompanied me to the Appalachian Trail. Since then, we have done research along trails in wilderness and traditional pilgrimage routes, such as the Camino de Santiago and in Israel. In introducing this research to students, I also teach them phenomenology, as this is the approach I use. Rather than a methodology that conceptualizes subjects and objects of research, phenomenology attempts to open the researcher to the things themselves as they manifest from beyond human conception. With this in mind, we'll look at a couple of ways that long-distance hikers and pilgrims enact spiritual rambling. One way of practicing spiritual rambling is what I refer to as kenotic walking, or walking self-emptying. Kenosis is the Greek term that St. Paul uses in his letter to the Philippians when pointing to Christ's emptying himself of his equality with God through becoming a servant and suffering on the cross. Kenotic walking sometimes happens on long-distance hikes. Another way of describing kenotic walking is through the experience of flow, the merging of action and awareness. Let me describe this kenotic experience as it unfolded while I was on the Appalachian Trail. On this particular day, I experienced a unique energy while ascending. I was so caught up in the experience that while in the midst of the slow climb, I reflected on neither the difficulty nor the infusion of energy. I was aware of all the surround, of a woodpecker calling from the canopy above, and tree branches thrust into the hovering sky. I gazed at the beautiful trillium and other wildflowers that covered the slope under the dense forest and seemed connected to each bloom. I heard and saw rivulets of water coursing across the trail and down the mountain. The sun, low on the eastern horizon, peeked through the trees, and its radiance brightened the atmosphere as the light diffused in the mist, turning everything golden. At each moment I step up and up and up, onto and over large rocks, the tread of the trail, leg muscles flexing, heart pounding, blood pulsing, chest heaving as my lungs fill with sweet air and then release the breath. My thoughts while climbing this day ran like a river. This rock, this tree, this bird song, this purple, this bit of blue sky. And as these thoughts coursed, I was acutely aware of my muscles, heart, breath, the feel of the trail tread beneath my feet. Reflection did not happen. I was completely focused on each step, each thrust of the hiking pole that propelled me upward. This unique experience does not often happen. It is the merging of action and awareness, what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi refers to as flow. It is important to note that if the hiker practicing kenotic walking seeks the flow experience, the egocentric self moves back to the center. Kenotic walking is not a technique for achieving self-emptying. It is a happening wherein the rambler's self-consciousness evaporates and a total focus on the action of walking. Csikszentmihalyi writes, "One is very aware of one's actions, but not of the awareness itself." Kenotic walking might last minutes or hours. When it does give way to contemplative reflection, another practice of spiritual rambling takes form: reflective walking. Self-emptying opens the rambler to reflecting on potentiality, a reinterpretation of their life story in light of an open horizon of possibilities. Spiritual rambling can be a walking exegesis of one's life story and scripting a new story in the quest for meaning. Spiritual rambling also places hikers in liminality, into boundary spaces, beyond the frontiers of an established social order, apart from everyday life. Long-distance hiking, especially in wilderness, opens ramblers to experiences of kenotic and reflective walking. Entrance to the trail distances the rambler from the accustomed everyday life world and facilitates walking reinterpretation and rewriting. Henry David Thoreau's essay on walking illuminates the distinct experiences productive of meaning-making that happen in different kinds of spiritual rambling. Thoreau's admonition to enter the woods fully when we go rambling helps us understand the contrasting degrees of experience that such walks afford, long versus short, and in the wild versus through cultural landscapes. Some environments are clearly liminal, more conducive to distancing ourselves over a length of time and across space, separating us further from distractions. Thoreau writes, "Of course it is of no use to direct our steps to the woods if they do not carry us thither. I'm alarmed when it happens that I've walked a mile into the wood bodily without getting there in spirit. In my afternoon walk, I would fain forget all my morning occupations and my obligations to society. But it sometimes happens that I cannot easily shake off the village. The thought of some work will run in my head, and I am not where my body is. I am out of my senses. In my walks, I would fain return to my senses. What business have I in the woods if I am thinking of something out of the woods?" Long-distance hiking helps clear the rambler's thoughts of the village, as distance in both time and space separate the hiker from the village. Thoreau also brings attention to the spiritual in the ramble. Spirit here refers to the walker's full and holistic attention, focused and embodied in the ramble. In kenotic and reflective walking, we unpeach the peach. That is, we cast off preconceptual framing and open ourselves to a manifestation of the things themselves, our fellows, both human and extra-human, along the way. We all cooperate, one with another, in the process of meaning-making. In this, we become co-authors with fellow sojourners and with the constituents of the journey in creating a mutual story. Martin Buber describes this kind of happening in an encounter between himself as a young boy and a horse. On occasions during his youth, Buber would gently stroke the neck of his darling, a broad, dapple-gray horse. He writes that it was not a casual, but a friendly, and also a deeply stirring happening. I interpret this deeply stirring happening as a kenotic experience. In this happening, the encounter was with the other. He writes, the immense otherness of the other, which, however, did not remain strange like the otherness of the ox and the ram, but rather, let me draw near and touch it. In this case, Buber and the horse dialogue and become co-constituents of their world. This same immense otherness of the other happens in kenotic walking on long-distance hikes. In touching the horse, Buber describes in detail the life beneath my hand. It was as though the element of vitality itself bordered on my skin, something that was not I, was certainly not akin to me, palpably the other. Not just another, really the other itself. And yet it let me approach, confided itself to me, placed itself elementally in the relation of thou and thou with me. During the encounter with the horse, Buber is not self-reflective. He goes on to write that the two became fellow conspirators and that he felt approved. However, at some point, while stroking the horse's neck on another occasion, Buber became conscious of his own hand. In the consciousness of his own hand stroking the horse's neck, the profound fellowship Buber had felt ceased. Buber and the horse were no longer conspirators. In becoming self-reflective, the kenotic experience ceased, and the encounter with the immense otherness of the other also ceased. But later, after the fact and in reflection, Buber does write of the encounter as a life-changing event. One might say that Buber reinterpreted his life as co-constituted within a world that he and the horse had started to write together. The liminality of a long-distance hike facilitates such a reinterpretation of life as co-constituted and cooperative. Long-distance hikers become liminal, or homeless, as they embark on a journey. They leave their own familiar place of dwelling, their village, and become strangers, pilgrims. As liminal personae, they are not tourists. Their non-status as homeless versus having the status of tourists is illuminated by Jacques Derrida's discussion of unconditional hospitality. Tourists are not liminal, practice conditional hospitality, and occupy status within the boundaries set up by the recreation industry. Tourism ambiguates hospitality in that recreation corporations self-reference as operating within the hospitality industry. Those engaging in this hospitality enter into an economy of exchange, thereby negating the gift of hospitality. Jean-Luc Marion writes, the gift begins and in fact ends as soon as the giver envisions that he owes something to someone, when he admits that he could be a debtor and thus a recipient. In this exchange, the recreation establishment nullifies giving through the commodification of the gift. Marion explains that gifts are annulled in such a situation because they do not belong to the economy of exchange. Giving and receiving hospitality becomes similar to other economic exchanges. Derrida writes, absolute hospitality requires that I open up my home and that I give not only to the foreigner, but to the absolute, unknown, anonymous other, and that I give place to them, that I let them come, that I let them arrive, and take place in the place I offer them without asking of them either reciprocity, entering into a pact, or even their names. Hiker pilgrims, liminal and homeless, leave behind their economic status and open themselves to receiving hospitality. They have nothing to offer in terms of exchange. Victor Turner writes, these persons elude or slip through the network of classifications that normally locate states and positions in cultural space. He goes on to describe these persons as having no status, property, insignia, secular clothing indicating rank or role, position in a kinship system. Tourists retain status and enter into a cultural agreement to exchange one good for another. Hiker pilgrims do have a kind of dual existence in that they travel beyond the boundaries of the marketplace reality, often having no proper token of exchange. At the same time, they seem to inhabit that same marketplace, sometimes entering into an economy of exchange. When they do inhabit the marketplace, their interaction is not one of receiving hospitality. When ramblers return home, they may begin to live out their reinterpreted life. They may discover that they are sharing place with co-constituents who had been ignored or used towards some utilitarian and egocentric end. They may begin to seek ways of cooperative living with these fellow sojourners. Welcome to my back garden. Many of you alumni will remember having class here around this fire. So how does spiritual rambling relate to the current coronavirus pandemic? Jim Robbins published an essay titled The Ecology of Disease in the New York Times, July 14, 2012. He notes that ecosystem services benefit humans and that failing to take care of these systems can haunt us. The coronavirus, originating in a wet market, exemplifies this haunting. The reinterpreted life of the homeless sojourner who returns home and finds their life entwined in a web of interrelated fellow constituents has discovered something about taking care of these systems. Robbins writes, disease, it turns out, is largely an environmental issue. A large portion of emerging disease originate in wildlife. He goes on to write, human, animal, and ecological health are inextricably linked and need to be studied and managed holistically. Taking care also means giving space. We learn how important giving space is while spiritual rambling. We become guests in someone else's home, someone extra human, an array of others. While in their place of living, we learn to receive the gift of hospitality. Coming home and living out a reinterpreted life means becoming more hospitable and realizing the importance of valuing the land belonging to extra humans, an array of others. By giving space for the wild to flourish, we practice a more holistic and healthy living and might find fewer emerging diseases spilling into our lives.